The Friday afternoon traffic crawling out of downtown Austin was thicker than usual, but Michael Russo barely noticed. His mind wasn't on the bumper-to-bumper crawl or the demanding clients of Russo Homes, the custom building company he'd painstakingly built from the ground up over 20 years. It was on the gnawing unease that had settled in his gut over the past few weeks. Something was off with Isabel. Izzy, his wife of 15 years. She'd been distant, evasive, glued to her phone with a secrecy that was entirely out of character. Their usual easy banter had been replaced by strained silences, their intimacy dwindling to almost nothing. He tried asking, gently probing, but she brushed off his concerns with vague excuses about stress or feeling unwell. But Michael knew his wife, or thought he did, and this felt different, deeper, colder. He finally pulled into the long driveway of their sprawling modern home in the Westlake Hills area, the kind of house his younger self sweating over blueprints in a cramped apartment could only have dreamed of. He valued loyalty, honesty, the solid foundation of trust, principles he applied equally to the houses he built and the family he cherished, which made the current tension with Izzy all the more unsettling. As he parked his truck in the garage, the unease solidified into alarm. Through the connecting door to the mudroom, he could see unfamiliar cars parked further down the driveway, partially hidden by the manicured landscaping. He recognized the sleek lines of his father-in-law, Robert's sedan, the ostentatious SUV belonging to his mother-in-law, Eleanor Vance, and the practical Volvo driven by Izzy's younger sister, Chloe, and her husband, Dr. Ethan Grant. The entire Vance clan. Here. Unannounced. On a Friday afternoon when he usually worked late, a cold dread washed over Michael. This wasn't a casual drop-in. This felt coordinated, like an ambush. He entered the house quietly through the mudroom entrance, pausing in the hallway. He could hear low, murmuring voices coming from the main living room, Izzy's distinctive laugh, cut short, Eleanor's sharp, commanding tones, Ethan's quieter responses. He slipped his phone from his belt clip, a habit ingrained from years of needing to document on-site change orders and unexpected client demands. He discreetly activated the voice recorder app, ensuring the microphone was clear, before sliding the phone back into his pocket. Whatever this was, he wanted a record. Taking a deep, steadying breath, Michael pushed open the living room door and stepped inside. The conversation stopped abruptly. 8 pairs of eyes swiveled towards him. Izzy sat on the edge of the plush sofa, looking pale and anxious. Beside her, Eleanor Vance, matriarch of the family, sat ramrod straight, her perfectly coiffed silver hair catching the light, her expression one of barely concealed impatience, as if Michael's arrival was an inconvenient interruption. Robert Vance, his father-in-law, a retired judge whose pragmatism often buckled under his wife's force of will, shifted uncomfortably in his armchair. Across from them sat Chloe, Izzy's younger sister, looking fragile and hopeful, clutching the hand of her husband Ethan, a pediatrician whose usual gentle demeanor seemed strained. Even Izzy and Chloe's quiet, unassuming aunts, Joan and Karen, were perched awkwardly on dining chairs brought in for the occasion, completing the semicircle facing the room's entrance. The only empty seat was a lone armchair, deliberately placed slightly apart, clearly intended for him. A stage had been set. "Michael, darling," Eleanor began, her voice smooth but lacking warmth, "you're home early. We were just having a little family discussion." Michael didn't move towards the designated chair. Instead, he walked slowly towards the center of the room, his gaze sweeping over the assembled family, finally landing on his wife. He kept his voice level, dangerously calm. "A family discussion? That involves my entire family-in-law descending on my house unannounced on a Friday afternoon? What's going on, Izzy?" Izzy flinched at his directness, twisting her hands in her lap. She glanced nervously at her mother before speaking, her voice thin. "Michael, we wanted to talk to you together. About Chloe. About finding a way for her and Ethan to have a child." Michael's eyes narrowed. He knew Chloe's struggle. Years ago, aggressive cancer treatment had saved her life but left her unable to conceive. It was a source of deep sadness for Chloe and Ethan, and a constant, obsessive focus for Eleanor, who lamented the lack of grandchildren bearing the prestigious Vance name, pointedly ignoring Michael and Izzy's own 2 children, Leo, 13, and Sophia, 11, whose Russo heritage Eleanor had always subtly denigrated. They had discussed options before: adoption, donor eggs, ideas Eleanor had vehemently rejected. "Blood matters, Michael," she'd declared, "a true Vance legacy." "We've talked about this," Michael said carefully, keeping his eyes on Izzy. "Adoption is a wonderful path, or a F with a donor. No! Eleanor cut him off sharply, her voice brittle. Clinical interference. Donor unknowns. Unacceptable. Chloe deserves a child of her own bloodline, our bloodline, and we have found the perfect solution. A gift of love, really. Michael felt the dread intensify. He knew Eleanor's manipulative nature, her obsession with control and lineage. What solution, Eleanor? Eleanor beamed, a predatory glint in her eyes. Izzy has generously agreed, Michael, to carry a child for Chloe and Ethan. Silence hung heavy in the room. Michael stared at his wife, searching her face. Izzy wouldn't meet his gaze. Carry a child? Surrogacy. It was extreme, certainly needed discussion, but it's the only way to ensure the child is truly part of the family, Eleanor continued, pressing her advantage. No anonymous donors, no cold laboratories, conceived naturally, carried with love by her own sister. Michael felt the blood drain from his face as the full implication hit him. Conceived naturally. His gaze snapped to Ethan, Chloe's husband, who flushed and looked down at his shoes, then back to Izzy, whose eyes were now filled with tears, still refusing to look at him. Naturally? Michael repeated, his voice dangerously low, barely a whisper. What the hell are you talking about, Eleanor? It's quite simple, Eleanor said dismissively, as if explaining something obvious to a child. Ethan will provide the contribution. Izzy will provide the vessel. A natural conception, born from family love. It's the purest way. The room spun. Michael felt a roar building in his ears. Ethan will provide the contribution. They weren't talking about surrogacy in any recognizable sense. They were talking about his wife sleeping with her sister's husband, planned adultery, blessed by the family matriarch. His gaze locked onto Izzy, cold fury replacing the initial shock. Izzy! He bit out, each word clipped. Did you agree to this? Did you agree to sleep with Ethan? Izzy flinched, tears spilling over. Michael, please understand. It's for Chloe. Mom says... Did. You agree? Michael's voice cut through her stammering excuses like steel. She couldn't speak, just gave a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, her eyes pleading with him. That nod shattered something inside Michael. 15 years of marriage, of building a life, a family, a business together, reduced to this sordid conspiracy hatched behind his back. The betrayal felt physical, a raw wound tearing through him. Get out, he said, his voice shaking slightly, not with weakness, but with barely contained rage. Eleanor bristled. Michael, don't be unreasonable. This is a family decision. Get out! Michael roared, the sound echoing in the large room, making everyone jump. He pointed towards the door, his entire body trembling. All of you, get out of my house, now! Robert Vance, finally jolted into action, stood up quickly. Eleanor, Chloe, Ethan, perhaps we should go. Give them some space. Eleanor looked mutinous, ready to argue, but Robert shot her a warning look she rarely ignored. Ethan practically scrambled towards the door, avoiding eye contact with anyone. Chloe sobbed quietly, torn between her desire for a child and the wreckage unfolding before her. This isn't over, Michael, Eleanor hissed as Robert ushered her towards the entryway. You can't stand in the way of family. This isn't family, Eleanor, Michael shot back, his voice dripping with contempt. This is a sickness. Get out. He watched them leave, the aunts scurrying behind until only he and Izzy remained in the vast, silent living room. The sound of the front door closing felt like a final punctuation mark. Izzy stood by the sofa, weeping silently, looking small and broken. But Michael felt no pity, only a cold, hard fury. The foundation of their marriage, the trust he had implicitly placed in her, had just been fractured, possibly beyond repair, by a betrayal so profound he could barely comprehend it. He looked at his wife, the woman he had loved for 15 years, and saw a stranger manipulated by a toxic family into contemplating the unthinkable. The recording on his phone felt heavy in his pocket, a stark testament to the conversation that had just blown his world apart. The silence that descended after the Vances departed and was thick and suffocating, broken only by Izzy's ragged sobs. Michael stood by the large living room window, staring out at the darkening Austin skyline, his back to his wife. The city lights seemed cold, distant, mirroring the icy chasm that had just ripped open between them. Michael, please, Izzy whispered, her voice choked. You have to understand the pressure. Mom. Chloe. He turned slowly, his face hard, devoid of the warmth and affection she was used to seeing. Understand what, Izzy? That my wife agreed to sleep with her sister's husband? That my mother-in-law orchestrated it? That my entire family-in-law sat in my living room and tried to railroad me into accepting my wife's planned infidelity? What part am I failing to understand? Each word was clipped, precise, lethal. It wasn't like that, she cried, desperation flashing in her eyes. It was about helping Chloe have a baby. The only way Mom would allow... The only way Eleanor would allow. Michael cut her off, his voice dangerously low. Since when does Eleanor Vance dictate what happens in our marriage? In our bed? You made a choice, Izzy. You chose to betray me, betray us, betray everything we built. Don't you dare hide behind your mother now. He saw the fight drain out of her, replaced by a weary despair. He felt a flicker of the old protective instinct, the desire to comfort her, but stamped it out ruthlessly. The wound was too deep, the betrayal too fundamental. I need space, he said flatly. Don't follow me. He turned and walked towards his home office, closing the door firmly behind him, the click of the lock echoing the finality he felt settling over his marriage. He spent the night on the uncomfortable office sofa. The recorded audio file of the ambush saved securely, the sound of Izzy's occasional weeping outside the door doing nothing to thaw the ice around his heart. First thing Saturday morning, Michael was on a secure video call with Sarah Chen, a divorce attorney known for her sharp mind and no-nonsense approach. He had emailed her the audio file the night before. Michael, Sarah said, her expression grim after listening to the recording. This is egregious. The premeditation, the family coercion, Eleanor Vance's explicit rejection of alternatives and insistence on natural conception with the brother-in-law, it paints a very clear picture. So, legally? Michael asked, his voice tight. Texas is a no-fault divorce state, Sarah explained. But fault can heavily influence custody decisions and, in some cases, disproportionate division of community property, though your prenup seems solid regarding Russo Homes itself. Her agreement to this constitutes clear grounds for citing cruelty and demonstrates incredibly poor judgment regarding the children's emotional well-being. The recording is damning evidence of emotional manipulation and a conspiracy that fundamentally undermines the marital contract. We have a very strong position, especially regarding primary custody of Leo and Sophia, if it comes to that. Michael nodded grimly. Custody. The thought made him sick, but he wouldn't let his children be raised in the toxic shadow of the Vance family's manipulations. What about proof beyond the recording? Any corroborating evidence? Texts? Emails? Sarah asked. Michael hadn't looked yet, couldn't stomach the thought, but now, fueled by cold resolve, he knew he had to. Later that morning, finding Izzy asleep, exhausted from crying, her phone charging on the kitchen counter, he acted. He knew her passcode. They had always shared that level of transparency, a transparency she had evidently abused. His hands trembled slightly as he accessed her messages. It didn't take long. A dedicated group chat titled Project Nightingale, Eleanor's poetic euphemism apparently, featuring Izzy, Eleanor, Chloe, and Ethan. The messages laid bare the entire sordid plan in cold, hard text. Discussions about Izzy tracking her ovulation cycle. Arrangements for Ethan to visit their house under the guise of a family dinner during her fertile window. Eleanor giving explicit instructions, overriding Izzy's occasional feeble protests. Chloe expressing desperate gratitude mixed with anxiety. Ethan's responses were mostly passive agreements or brief confirmations, but his complicity was undeniable. Michael felt bile rise in his throat as he read messages where Izzy assured her mother she could handle Michael and make him see it was for the best. He screenshotted everything, the evidence compiling into a sickening portfolio of betrayal. That evening he confronted Izzy again. He found her curled up on the sofa looking lost. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. The cold certainty in his tone was enough. We need to talk about the reality of this situation, Izzy, he began, sitting opposite her, placing physical distance between them. She looked up wary. Michael, I know you're angry. Angry doesn't begin to cover it. He interrupted calmly. This isn't about anger. This is about consequences. You agreed to commit adultery, Izzy. Let's call it what it is. Not helping Chloe, not a gift of love, cheating, planned, premeditated, conspired with your family behind my back. It wasn't like that, she protested weakly. I felt trapped, Mom. Your mother doesn't get a vote, Michael stated flatly. You do. And you said yes. You agreed to let another man into our marriage bed under the guise of a family duty. The trust required for a marriage? You burned it to the ground with that agreement. He let the words hang in the air. Izzy started to cry again, trying the familiar tactic of vulnerability. But what about Chloe? Her heart is broken. This is her only chance. Chloe has options, Michael countered, unmoved. Adoption, donor embryos, options your mother rejected because of her twisted obsession with bloodlines, options you apparently didn't fight for. Instead, you chose the path that destroyed us. He leaned forward slightly. You sacrificed our family, our vows, on the altar of Eleanor Vance's demands. He saw the fight and her crumble, replaced by raw fear as she began to grasp the enormity of what she had agreed to, the finality in his voice. What are you saying? She whispered. I'm saying I've spoken to an attorney, Michael said, his voice like ice. I have grounds, strong grounds, for divorce, for primary custody. The recording, the messages, they show a pattern of manipulation and a willingness on your part to engage in behavior that fundamentally breaks our marriage contract and potentially harms our children emotionally. Izzy gasped, her face paling further. Michael, no. Divorce, custody, that's the path you put us on, Izzy, he said quietly. However, I am willing. He paused, choosing his words carefully, to consider pausing immediate divorce proceedings under very specific, non-negotiable conditions. Not because I think this marriage is salvageable, frankly I doubt it is, but for Leo and Sophia, to offer a slightly less damaging transition, if you demonstrate unequivocally that you understand the gravity of your actions and remove the possibility of this ever happening again. Hope flickered briefly in her eyes. Anything, Michael. I'll do anything. First, Michael stated, holding up a finger, this plan involving Ethan stops. Now permanently. You cease all discussion of it with him, with Chloe, and most importantly, with your mother. You explicitly tell Eleanor that decisions regarding your body and our marriage are yours and mine alone, and her interference ends today. No negotiation on this. Izzy nodded quickly, swallowing hard. Okay. Yes, I can do that. Second, he continued, his voice hardening, if, and only if, condition 1 is met without reservation, I might consider funding one round of IVF for Chloe and Ethan using anonymous donor embryos. Not your eggs, Izzy. We sever Eleanor's bloodline objective completely. It would be an anonymous gift from us, as a couple to them. Nothing more. Relief washed over her face again. Thank you, Michael. Yes, we can do that. But, Michael cut her off, his gaze intense, pinning her in place. There is a third condition, the most important one, the one that proves to me that you understand the finality of this, that you are truly severing your mother's control, and that I never have to fear this specific kind of betrayal again. He paused, letting the weight settle. For me to agree to pause the divorce and fund that IVF attempt, you must agree to undergo a tubal ligation, permanent sterilization, scheduled immediately. The color drained completely from Izzy's face. She stared at him, horrified, speechless. Sterilization? Michael... No! How could you... That's barbaric. Controlling. Is it? Michael countered, his voice dangerously soft. Or is it the only logical consequence? The only way I can have any assurance, however small, that years down the line, Eleanor won't pressure you into trying this again? The only way I know this specific wound won't be reopened? You proved your judgment is compromised where your family's concerned. You proved you were willing to sacrifice our marriage vows. This isn't about controlling you, Izzy. This is about protecting myself and our children from the fallout of that weakness ever again. It's the price for me even considering not filing these papers tomorrow morning. He stood up, the conversation over from his perspective. Think about it. Tell Eleanor her plan is dead. Tell me you agree to my terms, including the procedure, or tell me you refuse. If you refuse, or if I hear one whisper that you're still considering anything involving Ethan, Sarah Chen files for divorce and full custody Monday morning. The choice, he finished, his voice flat and devoid of emotion, is entirely yours. He walked out of the living room, leaving Izzy frozen on the sofa, grappling with the devastating ultimatum. He went back to the office, locking the door again. He didn't know what she would choose, But he knew with chilling certainty that regardless of her answer, the foundation of their life together had fractured, and the cracks were likely too deep to ever truly mend. Izzy spent the weekend locked in a state of numb panic. Michael's ultimatum echoed in her mind, each condition a brutal brick in the wall he had erected between them. Divorce, loss of primary custody, financial uncertainty, and sterilization. The word itself felt like a violation, a permanent scar marking her body as proof of her betrayal, even a betrayal she felt coerced into. She raged silently against Michael's coldness, against Eleanor's suffocating manipulation, against Chloe's desperate need that had somehow twisted into this nightmare. She tried calling her mother, wanting to lash out, to blame her, but Eleanor was unreachable, likely celebrating her perceived victory or already planning the next phase. Izzy felt utterly alone, trapped between her husband's unyielding terms and her family's toxic expectations. The choice, however stark, became clear through the haze of tears and fear. Losing Michael, losing the life they had built, losing the primary connection to Leo and Sophia, it was unthinkable. Compared to that abyss, even the chilling finality of sterilization seemed like the lesser of two evils. The fantasy her mother had spun, the distorted gift for Chloe conceived through infidelity, dissolved into the ugly conspiracy it truly was. On Sunday evening, pale and trembling, she found Michael in his study. "I agree," she whispered, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. "I'll do it. I'll tell Mom the plan is off. I'll schedule the procedure. Just don't file the papers, Michael. Please, for the kids." Michael looked at her, his expression unreadable. There was no triumph in his eyes, only a deep weariness. "All right, Izzy," he said quietly. "One step at a time. You make the calls. You schedule the consultation. I'll fulfill my end regarding the IVF funding after your procedure is confirmed, and I will put the divorce proceedings on hold, but withdrawing them completely. That depends on what happens next, including counseling." The following weeks were a blur of strained interactions and medical appointments. Izzy's conversation with Eleanor was by all accounts explosive, resulting in weeks of stony silence from her mother. Chloe was devastated, but accepted the situation with quiet resignation when Izzy explained Michael's absolute refusal and the potential consequences. Ethan seemed almost relieved to be off the hook. Izzy scheduled the Tubal ligation, undergoing the procedure with a sense of numb detachment. Michael accompanied her to the hospital, a silent, stoic presence, fulfilling his duty but offering no real comfort. True to his word, Michael arranged and paid for one cycle of IVF using anonymous donor embryos for Chloe and Ethan. They went through this process hopefully, but it failed. No pregnancy resulted. There were no funds offered for further attempts. Michael had fulfilled his bargain. Chloe and Ethan were left to navigate their own path. Michael and Izzy started marriage counseling. They sat in the therapist's calm office, talking politely about schedules, the children, household logistics. But when the therapist gently probed deeper towards the original breach, the conversation inevitably stalled. Izzy expressed remorse, spoke of family pressure, of feeling trapped. Michael acknowledged her feelings but couldn't bridge the gap. "I understand the pressure you felt," Michael stated during one session, his voice flat. "But understanding isn't the same as trusting. The core issue remains. When faced with an impossible choice driven by your family, you agreed to betray our marriage in the most fundamental way. You were willing to sleep with another man. Even if it didn't happen, the fact that you agreed to it, how do I ever know, truly know, that faced with enough pressure again, you wouldn't make a similar choice?" The therapist tried to guide them through exercises on rebuilding trust, but it felt like trying to glue together shards of glass. The cracks remained visible, sharp. The knowledge of the planned infidelity, the conspiracy behind his back, was a wound Michael couldn't forget. For Izzy, the forced sterilization, while a choice she made to save her family structure, remained a constant physical reminder of that broken trust and the price she paid. The counseling eventually fizzled out, deemed unproductive by mutual unspoken consent. And so, they settled into a new normal, an arrangement. For the next 10 years, Michael and Izzy Russo lived under the same roof, functioned as impeccable co-parents to Leo and Sophia, but existed as husband and wife in name only. They attended school functions together, hosted holiday dinners, though the Vance side attended with strained politeness, maintained a convincing facade for their children and the outside world. Their large modern house, once filled with the potential of a shared life, became a beautifully decorated stage, set for a play about a family, where the lead actors retreated to separate wings when the curtain fell each night. There was no warmth, no shared laughter in unguarded moments, no easy intimacy. They occupied separate bedrooms most nights. They managed finances independently, adhering strictly to the prenup's delineation of assets. They were partners in parenting, efficient and coordinated, but the emotional core of their marriage had flatlined on that Friday afternoon 10 years prior. Leo and Sophia, perceptive as children are, likely sensed the chill beneath the polite surface, but grew up accepting it as their family's unique, quiet dynamic. Life moved on. Russo homes continued to thrive under Michael's leadership. Izzy, perhaps finding an outlet, poured more energy into her design work, achieving modest success. Leo went off to college on the East Coast, studying economics. Sophia, artistic like her mother, but with her father's quiet determination, pursued photography locally. Chloe and Ethan, after the failed IVF, eventually adopted a child and seemed to find a measure of happiness, though their relationship with Eleanor remained strained. Eleanor Vance grew older, perhaps lonelier, her dreams of a specific Vance legacy unfulfilled, her manipulations having ultimately cost her a close relationship with both her daughters. Robert Vance expressed quiet regret to Michael once, years later, about not standing up to Eleanor sooner. The catalyst for the final act came, as it often does, when the children had flown the nest. 2 weeks after Sophia moved into her own apartment after graduating, Izzy approached Michael one evening as he sat reading in the living room, a room they rarely shared simultaneously anymore. There were no suitcases this time, no tears. Just a quiet resignation, a shared understanding. "Michael," she began softly, sitting in the armchair opposite him, "we need to talk." He lowered his book, meeting her gaze. He already knew what was coming. "We've done well," she said, a faint sad smile touching her lips. "For Leo and Sophia, we gave them a stable home, we were united for them, but they're launched now, and we've been living separate lives for a decade." She took a breath. "We both knew this was inevitable, didn't we? Ever since that day. The cracks were always there, Michael. We just learned to walk around them. It's time." "Time to stop pretending?" Michael asked quietly. She nodded, tears finally glistening in her eyes, but these were tears of acceptance, not anguish. "Time to file the papers, finalize what's been true for years, let each other go, properly." She slid a simple envelope across the coffee table. "My lawyer's contact information. Let's make this as straightforward as possible, like we agreed." Michael picked up the envelope. There was no anger left, only a profound sense of melancholy, of years lost to a betrayal that, while prevented indeed, had irrevocably poisoned the root. "Okay, Izzy," he said simply. "It's time." The divorce was quiet, efficient, processed according to the terms of the prenup signed so many years ago. Michael kept Russo homes in the house. Izzy received her share of the marital assets accumulated since the wedding, enough to establish herself comfortably and independently, finally free from both Michael's shadow and her mother's financial strings. Their separate futures unfolded. Michael continued to build Russo homes, finding satisfaction in his work and immense pride in Leo and Sophia, who navigated their parents' divorce with maturity, understanding the complex history that led to it. He found peace in the quiet order of his life, occasionally dating but never seeking the kind of all-consuming connection he'd once thought he had. Izzy, freed from the weight of her family's expectations and the hollow pretense of her marriage, perhaps rediscovered her own artistic voice, maybe traveled, finding an independence she hadn't realized she craved. The foundation, fractured so severely 10 years before in a conspiracy born of misplaced duty and manipulative control, had finally crumbled completely. The affair never happened, but the intent, the willingness to betray, had been enough. Some cracks simply run too deep to ever truly mend, leaving behind it only the quiet echo of what might have been.